Okay, throughout the entire series of George Lopez, we see a lot of insecurity, sarcasm, fights, overall trauma. But under all of that, there is one question that we need an answer to. Is this marriage actually healthy, or are we just used to seeing George and Angie live together? Because when you look at George and Angie side by side, they are two completely different people, and yet somehow they always last. So today, let's ask each other a question. Are George and Angie actually compatible, or did they just survive each other? As always, if you enjoy the content, hit the like, subscribe, comment below, and let's get on with the video. All right, so I actually got this idea because the more I rewatch the show, George often makes comments about how he would be happy if Angie just stopped talking and Angie just left him. But then when the moment gets serious, George always tells Angie how lucky he is to have her. So it kind of just highlights that George only talks to Angie in a sweet way when things are actually bad, but he almost takes her for granted, and Angie is more or less always supportive of George on every decision, unless she actually needs to call him out. See, George is very prideful, while Angie is more emotionally open. They both communicate very differently, but overall, Angie is a lot more emotionally stable than George will ever be. Now, on paper, they don't match. George reacts and Angie processes. George often reacts with jokes, but Angie confronts insecurity head on. And honestly, for the early seasons and maybe even some of the last ones, the emotional maturity in the relationship is really owned by Angie. See, when it comes to working, Angie is the one that stays home, and there are constantly a lot of remarks from George that Angie has the easier job. And it really honestly highlights a big thing here in the argument I'm trying to make, because George and Angie actually have a whole bunch of competitions throughout the show where they basically decide who works harder. And surprise, surprise, George wins every single time. There is a time where they actually compete to see who can spend less, and George beats her. There's another time where they compete to see who does more things at home, and of course, George beats her. Last but not least, there is one more time where George actually does Angie's job because Angie tells George that it is the hardest job, and George manages to work his job and plan a wedding at the same time, successfully doing both. It honestly tells you that George probably looks at Angie as the one that does less in the marriage, and Angie more than likely feels that throughout the years. Here's the thing though, George is insecure, but he is loyal. I don't think George would actually do something to destroy the family. But look at the later seasons. George becomes much more grounded than he is in the beginning. See, in the beginning, he's still playing this sitcom dad that is always involved, but he's just a little bit over the top. But any sitcom dad in every show always thinks the wife is supposed to just be home taking care of the kids, and her work is not as hard as it should be, or at least as hard as the wife makes it out to be. But in the end, I mean, think of the finale. George literally picks family, friends over everything. See, the compatibility may have not always been there, but it grows, and honestly, that's the point. So, if we're talking early seasons, I don't think George honestly deserved Angie. I think Angie for sure stayed for the kids because there's a lot of moments where you kind of question how is Angie with this guy. But long term, yes, George did a lot of growing up, and I'm pretty sure at some point he makes it up to Angie in a way that Angie feels valued. I will leave you with this though. I wholeheartedly believe that Angie is way too good for George. But as always, let me know what you think. Honestly, there's no right or wrong answers, but there is a wrong answer. If you enjoyed the video, as I said, please hit the like, drop a comment, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.